Good evening, welcome to the organization portion of the Portage meeting.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adequate public notice of the meeting has been given, and the statement of public meeting notice is included in tonight's agenda. We also note in there that the board, during the regular operating portion of the agenda, which we will get to after reorganization and executive session, does have two opportunities for the public to speak. One, the first being on items that are on the agenda, and the second being for items that may or may not be on the agenda. With that said, I'd like to ask the three board members who were elected in November to just come forward to the front of the stage to be sworn in and to take the oath of office. Horner?
Here.
Mrs. Gray?
Here.
Mr. Fry? Here. Mrs. McCune? Mrs. Richmond?
Here.
Mrs. Bolger?
Here.
Mr. Martin? Here. Mr. Sy? Here. At this time, I'd like to call for nominations for the office of president of the Board of Education. Mrs. McCune?
I would like to nominate Linda Woolridge for president.
Do we have any seconds? Maybe not, but I'm going to ask for it. Not that one. Are there any other nominations for the office of president? May I have a motion to close the Mrs. Wright? May I have a second? This time I'm going to call the roll, even though Mrs. Horner?
Yes.
Mr. Fry? Yes. Mrs. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
This time I'd like to turn the gavel over to Mrs. Woolridge and call for nomination for the office of vice president.
I'd like to call for nominations for vice president. I'd like to nominate Doris Warner. And I'll second it. Oh, I'm sorry. Yours first, Tom. Are there any other nominations? No?
Mrs. Sparker,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Fritchman,
Yes.
Mrs. Holdridge, Mrs. McKeely, Madam President.
Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased tonight to be able to, at long last, present to you our park results, as well as other state testing results, the New Jersey Ask and the New Jersey Biology Competency Test results. So as a very quick review, last year, for the first time, New Jersey chose to use the park assessment, the Partnership for the Assessment of College and Career Readiness assessment to replace the HSPA and the New Jersey ASTIC for elementary and middle school students. These tests were in both language arts and math. In language arts, students in grades 3 through 11 were tested, and in mathematics, students in grades 3 through 8, as well as students taking Algebra 1, Geometry, or Algebra 2. In the past, those of you who are veterans of the assessment report presentations, we have taken a look at Berners Township's performance in comparison to New Jersey as a state, as a whole, and also as the former district factor group J groups, school groups. One of the changes that we're going to see tonight is we will be comparing to New Jersey as well as the Park Consortium, which consists of 11 states in the District of Columbia. Okay, so recently, right before the vacation, we sent out to families of students who participated last year in the park assessment. We sent the individual student score reports home. So that's something that I know families around the community were looking at over the vacation. And so I thought I would spend a moment just quickly going through what those reports look like and how we begin to interpret individual student results. So we look at it at that individual student level, and then we'll look at our grade levels in schools and expand outward from there. So attached to each score report was an interpretation guide for parents, which looked very much like the one you see on the screen here. This is an interpretation guide for a generic English language arts literacy test. So you can see that there are several components to this. First of all is the overall student performance piece, which would be their school right here. So for this fictional student, they obtained a score of 739, which was a 3. That score was presented within a graph, and the graph is divided into 5 different categories. And so those categories, or performance categories, that's something that we're going to be looking at, and that's new. In the past, we've had 3 score categories, partially proficient, proficient, and advanced proficient. And now we have 5 different categories. So level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So understanding this and thinking about what's a good score, what's a passing score, what's a score that's not passing, New Jersey has decided that a score of 4 or 5 is considered to be passing. Now, that's not the case for all of those states that I showed on the screen before. There are some of those states that have determined that a 3 would be a passing score. So ultimately, where this sort of becomes important, other than in interpreting your own child's score, is if ultimately the park is in fact used for as a graduation requirement, as we've heard it's planned to be, that passing score would be a score of 4 or 5 on the assessment. So we will be looking at that as our benchmark of a child meeting or exceeding grade level expectations. Okay? We also have a section, which you see in red here, which gives you a comparison. So if your child took the test in grades 3, 4, and 5, you'll see their score in comparison to the school and district. Those would be 2 different numbers. If they were a middle school or high school student, then of course the district and the school score would be the same. We also have the state average and then the park average. And so what we tend to see, a pattern that you will note, is that the park average tends to be the lowest number, then the state, and then the school or district school. Okay? So one of the questions that, or I guess one of the promises of park was that we will get individual student data that is more valuable than what we have been getting in the past on the New Jersey ASCO and HSPA assessment. And so that data needs to be informative in some way. And so one of the strategies that we see, Park has offered here is to break down the composite score, that language arts score that we saw, into some subcomponents, right? So our language arts assessment tested both reading and writing. And so you'll see a breakdown here that shows you how your child did, or how a child did in both reading and writing, and then in some subcomponents under those. So these are called subplanes, which is one of those educational buzz terms that really just means like a cluster area within writing or reading. So you can see in language arts there are 5 different subcategories or clusters. So under reading, you have literary text, informational text, vocabulary. Writing is writing expression and knowledge and use of language conventions. So these 5 subcategories or clusters are the same in all of the language arts assessments. So if we're looking at a grade 3 language arts report, or if we're looking at a grade 11 language arts report. So the mathematics reports are very, very similar. So they're laid out in a very similar format. Here's another theoretical child who scored level 3 in math. So that's that nearly meeting expectations, but not meeting or exceeding. So in New Jersey, not a passing score. Some other places, perhaps. And then we see that the main difference here is in mathematics. There isn't like a reading and a writing piece. It's mathematics, and then there are 4 cluster or subcategories under that: major content, additional and supporting content, expressing mathematical reasoning, and modeling and application. And what these correspond to are expectations, grade level expectations, which are outlined in the Common Core State Standards, which is what, in fact, Park is assessing students' achievement of. So additionally, with these subcategories or cluster areas, you can see that, that they've put in an icon to give you an indication of how the child did. So there's really 3 categories of performance here. You have a downwards pointing arrow, which means that the child in that particular subcategory performed below expectations. There's a horizontal arrow that's pointing both directions, and that means that the child nearly met grade level expectations. And then an upward pointing arrow indicates that the child met or exceeded expectations. So one of the questions that we had is, how does this sort of correlate to that 5-point scale? And the reality is it doesn't really correlate exactly to the 5-point scale. This is more to give you a sense of how a child did in a particular a particular skill set underneath all of mathematics or language arts. Okay, so along those lines of what type of information are we getting back and what was promised, one of the promises was that we would be able to see a number of sample items, and once the children took the test, we would get back, we'd get a whole bunch of information back that we could then study and have a sense of how did our children do compared to other children in the country, and compared to the grade level expectations and those sorts of things. What we have seen is that items were released. Many items were released from the tests. Park has published student work samples. They've published examples of what does a 5 look like, what does a 4 look like, what does a 3 look like. The rubrics, their alignment documents, and all of those things. But what we did not get back, and what we've gotten back in the past, is specific examples of our children's work. So one of the things we would get from the NJS or the HSPA was the writing samples that the students did, and they did their constructed responses. They would scan all of those in, all of the work of all of the students, put those on a CD, and they would send it to us, and then the language arts department would go through and they would study and see, okay, here's where Cindy did, and here, oh, she should have done this, and geez, I'll have to pass that information along to the teacher for next year, and we can work with her on it. We did not get individual student items like that. So that's one of the things that, one of the areas where it's, the information isn't as thorough. So to summarize, the data that we've gotten back is, I would say, less specific, but it's presented in a way that's more immediately useful for the teacher. So there is good and there is bad in getting used to this. It's always hard when it's like, this is what we were used to, and we have a workflow around that, and here's this whole new thing, and everyone's getting used to it. But those are the kinds of things that we're looking at now. Okay. Now, one of the pieces that, or one of the benefits of PARC that we're realizing that we never had with NJASC or the HSPA is there is a lot of information that has been published to assist families in using the information to help their own children at home. So I've listed some of these here. Certainly don't take frantic notes about this. This presentation will be put online for you, and you can access it, and these are all hyperlinks to go to this. But there are a number of different sites coming from different organizations whose goal is, how do we take this information and help translate that into student growth and learning? And so that's terrific, and these are resources that our teachers use as well. So they're targeted towards parents, but they're also very teacher-friendly as well. So some of those come right from Pearson, some of these come from the National PTA organization, and some of them come from the state of New Jersey. So coming from different places. Okay, so enough of that. I can see everybody wants to say, all right, how do you do it? Okay, so here we are. Here's how you do it. So first of all, state and local results. Okay, so let's look at the state results first, and then we'll look at our local results. Okay, so quick review. Level 4 and 5, passing. Level 1, 2, and 3, not passing. Okay, so when we look at percent of students meeting or exceeding standards, what we're talking about is the percent of students who attained a performance category score of 4 or 5 on the particular test that we're looking at. That one's passed. Okay? So there's going to be a test on this at the end of the presentation, so quickly memorize it. I'm joking, of course. These are the cut score ranges for each of the tests. Now, why don't I just have one line here? Because they're different for every single test. Now, the area where they're different is the line between 4 and 5. Okay, so that varies. The line between 1 and 2, and 2 and 3, and 3 and 4 is the same from 3rd grade all the way up through 11th grade, but that 4 and 5 score is different. So I put this slide in here, not to shock anyone, but for the folks who want to go look at this later and think about how it relates to your own child's performance. So you can use this to sort of see where those are. Okay, so we'll start by looking at New Jersey's performance. This is not Lawrence Township performance, this is New Jersey's performance on the English language arts and literacy assessment. So oriented grades 3 through 11, each performance category. I'd like to direct your attention to the far right. In that blue column, that's our passing rates. So you can see that as a state, this is not terrific, right? So we see a lot of very low percentages. We see that in most cases, the passing rate, and this has been highly publicized, in most cases the passing rate is hovering around 50%. Okay, and if we think back to No Child Left Behind and that sort of thing, the expectation was what? Every child is going to be successful and pass. So why did the state move to PARC? So one of the reasons why the state moved to PARC, the big reason why the state moved to PARC, was there were studies that basically came out and said, hey, our current assessment system is not really measuring college and career readiness. So those things that we're measuring and saying that a student has met this particular benchmark, and ultimately for HESPA, for graduation, so students are attaining a benchmark, and in New Jersey, they're very successfully attaining that. But that benchmark was not the same thing that colleges were looking for. Okay? So there was a disconnect. And so this was a phenomenon that was happening and being realized across the country. And so the impetus behind all this was we really need to come up with a system that better predicts college and career readiness. And our state assessment system should be one of those things. And so there were a number of recommendations, and so that's where this all came to pass. So essentially what this is saying now is that 41% of New Jersey students who participated in PARC, and we know that wasn't everybody, right? But of the students who participated in PARC, 41% are college ready as far as the language arts goes. Okay, so that's not great, right? But we're looking at this as a benchmark here, and we'll see in a second what that looks like for us here in Rivers Township. But first, let's look at mathematics. So mathematics is even a scarier scene, right? And I think some folks might have guessed that. But if our expectation is this Algebra 2 benchmark, right? And in many colleges, for those of you who have high school age children, you're looking at colleges and you're thinking about things like placement tests into calculus. That's even farther off the chart here, but this 24% passing rate for Algebra 2 is a scary thing. Okay? Now, one of the pieces when we go through this that can be confusing is grade 8. Okay? And particularly for us here in Rivers Township, grade 8 is a little bit different. Because typically, so students going through William Allen, if I'm in grade 8, what test do I take? Well, I'm going to take a test that's either the grade 8 test, or if I'm taking Algebra 1, I'm going to take the Algebra 1 test and not the 8th grade test. And that's the case for most of our 8th graders. And if I'm taking geometry, I'm going to take that geometry test and not the grade 8 test. Okay, and our 7th graders who took Algebra 1, well, they took the Algebra 1 test, the same one that a 9th grader taking Algebra 1 would take, or in some schools, 10th graders, or 11th graders for that matter, who was taking an Algebra 1 class, would take that. So when we look at these Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, we're looking at mixed grade groups of students. And that 8th grade piece there, for us, is going to be lower because those tend to be our students who find mathematics to be challenging. Okay? So the students in 8th grade who took the 8th grade test are the ones who find mathematics the most challenging of all our 8th graders. Okay? So we're only looking at that representative group. But this, of course, is the whole state, and so there is no real standard in the state about what percentage of 8th graders take algebra versus something else, pre-algebra, in effect. Okay. All right, so before we get to our, just because I can tell that anticipation, as everybody said, we're going to have that anticipation go just a little bit longer. So in thinking about, is the PARCC assessment a better measure of college and career readiness? Well, the only thing we can really do at this point, because it's year one, is we can look at other assessments that measure college and career readiness and sort of compare how they did. So we have a couple that we can take a look at. Okay? So the first is the NAEP assessment. Okay? And what that stands for, NAEP, we say NAEP, that means the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That used to be the only national test where we could sort of see how our students do compared with students nationally, which is always a tricky thing because if we're the Common Core standards, every state had its own set of English language arts and mathematics, and science for that matter standards, okay, which NAEP assesses all of those things. Now the problem with NAEP is all of the students don't take it. Only random samples of students take it. So certain districts get randomly chosen to participate in NAEP, and we're usually one of the districts that gets randomly chosen. And then within that school district, certain grades or classes of students get randomly selected. So it's intended to be a random cross-section of America and see where we are compared, relative to one another. And we also, one of the limitations is we don't get back results from NAEP of our individual students to see how they did. We see how our random group did, okay, which isn't all that helpful as far as making sure your instruction and curriculum are as strong as possible. But we can see here that there seems to be more of a correlation here between PARCC and NAEP than there was with, say, NJ Ask and NAEP. Okay? Whereas you see the percentage used to be much higher. So another one that we can think about is the SAT. Okay, so the SAT intended to be a measure of college and career readiness. And so the composite or combined score of 1550 essentially says if a child has that in 12th grade, then they have, I believe it is a 65% likelihood of getting a B- or better in a college level class. So that's the measure of college and career readiness. Okay? So in 2015, 44% of students met that college and career ready measurement. So we can, think about that 44% and correlate that to, this here, and it's in the ballpark, right? Is that statistically significant? Well, we don't have all the, all the data to really determine that, but we see it's at least more in the benchmark than the HSPA passing rates and things like that. And so the same would be true for the ACT, which is another one of these college and career benchmarks. So not to beat this to death, but it seems to be there's some indication that PARCC is in fact a better predictor of college and career readiness the test system that we know wasn't at all a predictive algebra. So, there we go. Okay, enough teasing everyone. Let's look and see how we do. Okay, so here we have our Burnix Township passing rates. Okay, so before you become scared, the blue column all the way to the right is still New Jersey. Okay, so don't freak out. We're looking at this, the one immediately to the left of that. That's our percentages here, our passing rate percentages. Okay, so I'm not going to go through here's our percent of level 1s, 2, 3, 4. Let's look at our passing rates, and we can compare those to New Jersey's passing rates. Okay, so as we would expect, we have very successful students here in this community, and our students did much better on this assessment than did the state as a whole. Okay? Now, I didn't put in the Clark column there because it was worse than the New Jersey column. So it's, we're looking at New Jersey. We do not have one of the things that we used to have in the past, right, which was the district factor grouping data. So district factor groups are really a thing of the past as far as the state of New Jersey is concerned. But last year, at least, we got a group of schools that were somehow identified as being similar to ours in terms of the demographic profiles of the community and things like that, which would be a better comparison tool. That's not something that we have been given yet. Okay, so I hope to get that at some point. That data has not been published at this point. So we can't compare ourselves to the district factor group J as we did in the past. That's not a possibility. So we can't compare ourselves to New Jersey as a whole for what that's worth. And so in every case, our students outperform significantly the state. So that's good. That doesn't really tell us anything that we didn't know already. We would have predicted. Okay. Here's our mathematics. And so we can see what that looks like there. And you can see our mathematics performance is also very strong. So this is a very high level view of this. And we'll zoom in a little bit. Okay. And so, as we move forward, what does all of this mean? So what kind of conclusions can we draw about our district, right? So we're being very cautious with drawing any conclusions at this point. So at this point, we have many more questions than conclusions. And I think that's appropriate since we have really, we have one data. It's hard to make a long one with one data. Mr. McCarran, former math teacher, he can tell me that's accurate if I draw one with one point. That's just one. Okay. But some of the questions that we are asking is, first of all, how can we use this data to strengthen our instruction and our curriculum? Okay, what opportunities are there? And so the way we do that is we can take a look as a whole and we can look for patterns. And then we can go back and we can look at some of those subcategory groupings and see if there are patterns within there. Okay? But of course we are being very cautious with that because year one of the test, so students were not familiar with this type of test. We had a number of individuals in the community who felt that they wanted to exercise their right not to participate in the test. So we don't have we didn't have 100% participation. So we have a sampling of our students, and that sampling varied between the buildings. So we're looking at what patterns exist and trying to ferret out the real patterns from the sort of artificial ones. Okay? We have begun to have conversations among the teachers around the data. What does this mean? how can I use this information that I now have about these particular children to better meet their needs this year based on where they were last year, okay? With regards to maybe I'm going to do a project and this can help me to group students together in a way that's going to help either strengthen the group or allow me to more efficiently manage the needs of the kids in the classroom and things like that, okay? What can we learn about where additional professional resources are needed? What do we need as a district? How are our textbooks? Are they meeting the needs of the curriculum? Okay, what about other resources, digital resources, things like that? Okay, and of course, you know, one of the questions that I've been sort of bringing up over and over is this data more useful than the stuff that we used to get? Right? And if so, how is it more useful? And where are they, you know, where are the sort of opportunities and where are the challenges that we have to work with? Okay. All right. So some more sort of looking at how our individual schools did. Okay? So I know everyone, it's human nature, we want to know how did our own children do, and then how did our schools do, our neighborhood schools, and things like that. So we are doing some of these comparisons and taking a look, and so you can see here we have, this is English language arts specifically, and these are passing percentages. Okay, again, that's a 4 or 5 level. For grades 3, 4, and 5, we can look at how the different elementary schools stacked up against one another. These are similar patterns to what we used to see when we would do the same look with the NJS. Okay, we can see William in there, just within the whole context of the district, and then of course Ridge High School. And for the elementary schools, you can also compare to the district along the bottom. Of course, grades 6 through 11, it's going to be the same pattern. So district, these here, okay. We have mathematics, very similar pattern to what we saw in language arts.